Hello everyone, it's Rena here. Welcome to my room, guys. Hope you're well today. Happy Saturday. Today we're going to be talking about INFJs as leaders. And it's part of this kind of series where I talk about INFJs in various positions and whether it suits them, how it can suit them, how it may not suit them. Lots of different kind of angles that we can use to address this question. So before I jump straight into the topic of whether INFJs make for good leaders, let me just remind you that you can get my book on the INFJ, The Ecstatic Soul, available down below. All the links are in the description box, and my new novel, The Infinite Castle, as well. So check them out. So INFJs as leaders. Excellent question. Now, the first thing that we want to say about this is that INFJs are introverts. So if they're going to be able to make for a decent leader, the category of leader that we're talking about is going to have to take into account the relative introversion of the INFJs. So the fact that they would get easily exhausted by, being in highly socially charged situations, speaking a lot, interacting with people across the day, not having a lot of, in the way of a private life. That's something that's not necessarily going to be easy for an INFJ. But the question of leadership goes quite a bit beyond that, and actually ties back to the topic that I discussed last weekend. You may remember that the video that I released last weekend was called Why INFJs Struggle in the Modern World. And one of the hypotheses that was expressed in this video was that INFJ in some way is a type that seems to have been made to strive and to thrive, not to strive, to thrive, to do well for itself in a world which is maybe pre-modern, where the importance of the spiritual, the relationship to the divine, to the sacred, to the irrational. I'm not speaking of the irrational, as in, faultily rational, attempt to be rational, but actually not being or thinking itself rational, but in fact being the opposite. Irrational as in beyond the rational, non-rational, worlds that had room for events, interpretation of events that did not make use of reference to the rational apparatus. INFJs, given their functional stack, given that introverted intuition and I has this peculiar way of connecting them to the contents of the unconscious, including the contents of the collective unconscious, giving them access to the archetypes and to symbols, put them in a peculiar position to share the symbolic imagery with others, and thereby, in some sense, assert some kind of leadership, not the kind of leadership that we think about nowadays in the West, because let's always try to keep in mind that when we're thinking of our current modern/postmodern world where reason, technology, and memes predominate, we are not necessarily thinking of all the cultures of the world. We have to, on the one hand, accept the fact that Western culture is influential, but we have to beware of the danger to be too Western-centric and assume that anything that is Western applies to the entire world. But certainly insofar as the West is concerned, I think that the INFJ type as a leader is going to be in a tough position. And that it is not worthwhile, either for me or for you, if I said what I do not think. In other words, that of course INFJs can be amazing leaders, even in the contemporary Western world. It's all about releasing your potential, man, and clean your room and unlock your potential, surpass and transcend your introversion, and you're going to be fine. You don't want to say this if this is not actually what you really believe. And I just think that in the world, in contemporary Western world, leadership positions, leadership roles for INFJs are going to be somewhat tough, that they're possible, but within islands of particular expertise that don't represent anywhere near the majority or even half of the totality of positions you can hold. In a workplace scenario, particularly in a company, but even in an NGO or even in the public service these days, the leadership functions are much more likely to be T and FE functions, and the accompanying introverted perception functions, I would say probably put probably NI and SI on an equal footing in some way. But you could actually make an argument that SI is actually more connected to contemporary concerns, because SI has an ability to embrace the temporality and historicity of a particular epoch, of a particular moment, including a particular workplace. So like the micro history of a workplace, whereas NI is something that is much more expansive, unfolds slowly across time, does not update itself easily. It's all about the long distances, the long durations. There's a French historian, very likely INFJ, Fernand Braudel, who invented the concept of the longue durée, long duration, which is to try to look at historical events, not from the perspective of the event itself, not even from the perspective of the decade in which that event happened, but in terms of like the very long term, like the long unfolding of time across centuries. That's a very NI perspective. Not necessarily ideal when you are the kind of leader that has to make decisions on the spot, decisions quickly, decisions that are unpopular, and to move on as well. To make a decision and for the sake of your psychological resilience to be able to move on quickly. Makes for great leaders. Does it mean that INFJs are well suited to this? No, because the NI is, not only is it slow to deliver these decisions, but even once they're made, they kind of continue having ripple effect on the psyche, so that you don't move on straight away, like maybe like an SE lead would, because SE lead, SE dominant can also be a great function for leadership, particularly if it's balanced with well-developed FE in tertiary position or well-developed T in tertiary position, depending on whether ESTP or ESFP. And the ability that SE dominants have to bounce back, or to move on to the next thing, what's in cognitive type they call the refresh kind of capacity of dominant extroverted perceivers, something that's very, very useful for leadership, does not apply to INFJs. So again, it's going to be hard. So what's left? What's the space that's left? I think that, again, you're going to have to think about the teaching positions, the academic positions, and the more spiritual type positions, including church positions, but it doesn't have to be church. It can also be mosque. It can also be in other types of religions. Because basically any position that either is directly connected to the spiritual, where the INFJ's prescience leading into the formation of a vision is going to be likely appreciated and seen as something that is truly instructive and has the quality of thought leadership, in a way, of visionary leadership, but symbolic leadership. And this is something that, most of modern world, Western workplaces is not going to have any time for. Very pragmatic, very practical. What are you going to contribute? We don't care about these symbols. But if you're in the position of being either, like I said, a kind of spiritual guide, or if you're in the position of being a teacher, who, of course, when you're a teacher or a lecturer in your particular fields, you're not necessarily going to be a lecturer in theology, and you don't have to be that. But oftentimes, because you're already kind of in a position where you're speaking to an audience, you're able to infuse what you're talking about with a particular kind of visionary character that constitutes your own perspective, and that can actually bring a lot of charisma with it. Because, ultimately a lot of students, a lot of pupils, a lot of learners, what they're looking for is not just being, taught a particular topic, but to be taught with enthusiasm and with a unique perspective on it. That's what will make you stand out. That's why Martin Heidegger, very likely anti-dominant, was such an unbelievably charismatic figure. Would Heidegger have been charismatic in any place outside of academia or teaching, or again, a church, because Heidegger was also very spiritual in that way? Very likely not, And of course, that you could apply that to lots of cases. And you'll also notice that, Even if you look at the influential INFJ leaders of the past, like even the sort of quasi-mythological ones, so that's so famous they are, like Jesus Christ or like the Prophet Muhammad, often, at least to an extent, it's very clear in the case of the Prophet Muhammad, reluctant leader because they saw the truth of something, that they were exposed to the truth of something, and they had the duty. They felt possessed by a calling. Again, the very INFJ theme, if you read my book, The Ecstatic Soul. But all this presupposes that there is in the population around you a willing receptiveness to the meaning of those symbols, to reaching beyond the pure materiality of your conditions. That's going to be very difficult outside of these areas that I just talked about: teaching, academia, spiritual, religion, which are, you could take these to be in some way residues of previous pre-modern eras that have survived, but not radically changed. Oh, academia is changing, the ideology of management is really percolating through it, but there's still room to be an INFJ leader within it. Now, I'm not saying that it's impossible to be an INFJ leader in other spheres in this contemporary modern Western world, because again, maybe in other cultures, non-Western, there might be more room for INFJs to thrive if there is still a lot of valuation for the symbolic and the perspective. But as far as the Western world is concerned, you're going to have to either accept that, okay, don't need to be a leader, or if you feel that you are one but you don't know where you can express that gift, or that talent, that propensity, just choose your domain carefully, because that might just be the key. But I would like to hear what your thoughts are. Let me know in the comments, and well, I will certainly see you tomorrow for the Sunday video. In the meantime, take care, guys, and don't forget that you can support me on Patreon. Always very helpful to help me produce new content in this difficult era of inflation. All right, see you guys. Take care.